We'll put it online for anyone who wishes to watch after the fact, and I will remember to mute folks. If you're, I hope everyone's doing well. Whether you're using your original or replacement knees, again, if you have any questions, feel free to mute yourself along the way as we go along. And I am looking at page 23 in the Steinsaltz Korn edition. It is in the. I put the link in the chat if you want to look online. It is 4B. I think we're going to start with paragraph 13 tonight, 1-3. But that's where it is. And the bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Now, I actually like this stuff because where we're going to be at today is very relevant to the name of the tractate, Brachot, blessings, and it's this stuff is straight out of the Siddur. I have I don't know. I mean, based on the earlier conversation, I can guess we can compare it old school or new school, whichever one we want. But like their issue here is what they were talking about last time is that you're supposed to somech. I think connect is a better word. They translate juxtapose, but juxtapose doesn't feel quite right to me, because what is meant is connect, link, and maybe that's what juxtapose means, but that's not how I think of it. It means next to. So they said that you're supposed to somech, you're supposed to connect the Shema to the Amidah. Or it connects there's supposed to be a connection from the Shema to the Amidah, and that connection is the blessing of redemption, Geula. You're supposed to go from the Shema, to Amidah with redemption in between. And that's the blessing that ends, Ga'al Yisrael. We usually say, Micha Mocha. Shira in the morning, Shira Chadasha, and Tzur Yisrael, and that line, Tzur Yisrael, ends, Baruch atah Go'el Yisrael. Blessed are you who liberates or who redeems the people of Israel. And then after that, after the blessing of Ga'al Yisrael, comes the Amidah. That's what's on the next page. That's the way it works. Now, what we're going to see here at the top of page 23, or in chapter 4b, paragraph 13, it is in the, if you're looking online, is they're going to bring a problem from Ma'ariv. And this is like one of the key signs that the Siddur they're looking at is the Siddur that I'm looking at, meaning this might be differently typeset and with a few different things here and there, but essentially it's the same, because their problem says, look, this guy you just said that you're supposed to link the Shema with the Amidah, with just the blessing of redemption, go El Yisrael. But the blessing after the Shema in the evening ends go El Yisrael, like we say that all the time. We say the Micha Mocha, but after Micha Mocha is Hashkivenu. And then on Friday you have Vishamru, then Chatzi Kaddish, then the Amidah. So fine, in the morning I say Ga'al Yisrael and go right to the Amidah, but in the evening I got this stuff in between. So that's going to be the problem. And that's the problem that's brought up here in this paragraph, and that's the same problem, and it's the same structure that we have here.
Rabbi?
Yep.
How does this stuff all get into the service? Like, why are these the particular things that are chosen for the service?
We're sort of seeing it. This is part of what's funny about it. Like from the outset, he said that the Talmud sort of assumes that you know all of rabbinics at once. Like, notice that they're arguing about this, but there's no like great origin story for it. it just seems to be that by the time they're having these conversations, everyone does it. Um, and nobody's saying like, oh, wait a minute, why do we have a siddur with blessings? Like nobody, that doesn't seem to be the question. The question is sort of like, why does it look the way it looks? So
Rabbi,
here, yeah.
was there a universal prayer book? Was there one major prayer book, or did different regions have their own version?
Well, always different regions with their own versions. That's true today, and that's always been the case. What these guys are likely talking about is if there is an ur text, an original siddur, as it were. One, obviously, we think of a prayer book, and it's something that Alan and Linda go and pick up from a warehouse, in Englewood, in big cardboard boxes. Of course, there's our handwritten, right? And based on the principles that are laid out in the Talmud, right? So, it seems that a service evolved over time, starting from these blessings in the Torah, these parts of the Torah, that say things like, say this morning and night, and that is, building block one. And as you know from the rest of Judaism, you don't do anything without saying a blessing beforehand, right? You don't drink water without saying a bracha for the water, or food without a blessing for the food. So there are blessings that will lead into the Shema, sort of the ramp up, and blessings out of it, like the ramp down, so that it's going up to the top, and then the Amidah, this series of many of them requests, though not all of them, so it seem to evolve over time, and all of this is actually in the Talmud, or much of it is that to sub in for the sacrifice that you're not bringing. And part of it you'll see even right here. Sorry, Steve. Does that at all address?
Because I still, it still is a little unclear why this stuff is all included, because it seems like the first siddur I was familiar with was Silverman, which I guess was done in the 30s. It's the same basic service in all these other editions since then. I don't know if there was different versions before Silverman that were materially different or not.
The Silverman siddur is sort of like the first widely used 20th century conservative siddur. It's the same as many Ashkenazic siddurs that came before it over the course of the centuries. The significant changes in it are a handful, and those remain reflected in its successor, Sim Shalom, and then in its successor, Lev Shalom. Every 30 years or so, 30, 40 years, the conservative movement would put out a new siddur, but all of them are based in the same Ashkenazic siddur that has many editions through the centuries before that.
Rabbi, but it's interesting how Lev Shalom omitted, certain prayers. One of the prayers omitted is Asher Yotzar in the morning, where thank God for your body parts. Well,
it's here.
It's not in Lev.
Asher Yotzar is here.
I don't think it's in there.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I missed it then.
They may sometimes the morning blessings are put into a different order. It's on page.
Okay, then I'm wrong.
99.
Okay, then I'm wrong. Then I'm wrong. It's not in the same order than in the Sim Shalom.
Yeah. So some of the morning things are in different. So some of the morning blessings are a different order. Here in the core of the service and what they're talking about here, and even stuff like that will be in the Talmud. The core of the service here, there's a hard and fast order to, and that's what they're talking about. The morning ones are more of a jumble, so you'll see different siddur editors put them in different places. Asher Yatzar, Elohai Neshama, the blessings for Torah. So like you'll see them in different spots. But this stuff, is
if
fixed.
there's so much discussion on this, brachas, who decided on the calendar that everybody, all sects, everybody accepts?
If we start down that road, we're never. We will need a new calendar for more days to cover it. So there are, I think, in Brachot we'll have scenes of calendar making. Same guys, same crew. The if biblical Judaism is like what biblical Judaism is, or like and like early post-biblical like Second Temple Judaism is what it is, like sort of like based still around the temple in Jerusalem and the Sanhedrin, and even then it's splitting off into sects, sects famously, right? Like there are Sadducees, there are Pharisees, there are Essenes, there's a Dead Sea sect if they're a different group. Eventually there are Christians, like there are there are different groups around. But all the stuff that they were doing can't survive a post-temple world. Like they all, like it needs to be, Judaism needs to adapt to the new environment. And these, the rabbis that we're talking about are the ones that successfully adapted. They're the Darwinian success. The other groups, Essenes, the Dead Sea sect, if they're a different group, which they might be, the Sadducees are, if you want to look at it from like an evolutionary perspective, they don't adapt to the new reality after the destruction of the temple, and so they die off. Those branches are cut. The Pharisees, presumably the proto-rabbis, do adapt, and they adapt through, it seems, what we're talking about here. This seems to be the adaptation, and they survive and continue being Jewish. And the Christian group, which also thought that they were the legitimate inheritors of the biblical tradition, also obviously survive, but they go in a different direction, right? They do something that they think is the legitimate thing, but that we would say is branching off and not the main trunk. But so these are the guys who adapted, and this is the successful adaptation that we're looking at. That's and they're the ones who make the calendar. That's why they make the calendar. They make the brachas. They make the Haggadah. They make the holidays. They make the rules. They're sort of like, they're the ones who do it. Now, their claim, of course, is that they're just doing Torah, the Moshe Sinai, right? They're just saying, oh, well, we're just transmitting what Moses taught. And you can say that. And some of the things they're bringing are clearly older. They will cite some of the brachas, some parts of the Siddur, seems were done in the temple, so it predates the rabbis, as it were. But most of it, with our somewhat skeptical eyes, would say that, well, wait a minute, they're like, maybe this isn't from Moses on Sinai. All right. So their issue, though, is somebody threw out there, this was I think it was Rabbi Yochanan threw down a principle saying that you're supposed to link the Shema to the Amidah with the blessing of redemption, Ka'al Yisrael. Redemption is the theme that links these two things. So the question comes, but you say Hashkivenu at night. At night I say Hashkivenu between Ka'al Yisrael and the Amidah. And notice nobody comes along and says, well, no, you don't. Everyone knows. This is what's sort of amazing about it. Everyone knows that you say that you say Shema, Ga'al Yisrael, Hashkivenu, Amidah. They all seem to know that, and they're just sort of like arguing about why it is. So it's just like it's already baked in by the time they're having this. So Amrei, finally get to the text. Amrei kevan de tiknu Rabbanan Hashkivenu gula arich ladamya. This is, the response is, well, since or because the sages, they're speaking of the sages, the Rabbanan, fixed Hashkivenu, that we're supposed to say it, Hashkivenu, help us lie down in peace, Lord. It is like one long bracha. So normally a bracha, a blessing, ends with Baruch Atah. Sometimes it begins, if it begins a section, it begins with Baruch Atah, like think of the Amidah, begins with Baruch Atah, right? It begins with, and then and that first blessing ends with, and then the next blessing begins, right? It doesn't, like the whole section begins with the Baruch Atah, and then afterwards, all the 19 blessings of Amidah end with Baruch Atah, but none of the other ones will begin with it. But each one blessing ends with it. That's the signal of the end. They're saying here, it's the same thing for the whole service, right? If you think of the morning service, begins, you say Baruch Hu, and then the whole section of Shacharit begins with Yotzer Or, which is Baruch Atah Yotzer Or V'Choshech, right? You begin with that, and then you go on, and that's the first blessing. So Baruch Atah begins a section, and it ends every bracha. Here they're saying that Hashkivenu and Goel Yisrael, it's just one long blessing. They had a problem. We said we're supposed to have only one blessing there, and there are two. Answer, well, those two, it's really just like one big one. It's not a great explanation, which leads me to think that they had the principle that they didn't want to argue about. You're supposed to connect with just Gal Yisrael. They had a problem. Everyone knows you don't actually do it this way. And so they had to invent an answer, lousy though it may be, which is, it's like one long blessing. Makes sense? So they give an answer, but here, to my eyes at least, it's a lousy answer. It's like one long blessing. But here they can bring up other questions. Di la tema achi, shachrit hachi. He's like, but even if you don't like that reason, or you could say even the opposite, even if you like that reason, I'm not sure I buy into their English here says that even if you fail, say the sections added by the sages are considered no less significant than the individual prayers. I'm not sure that the light face there is exactly what's meant. That one can juxtapose, connect redemption to prayer, even in the morning, because here they have a problem. They're going to bring a quote. Ha Amre, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, "B'tchila Amrar Adonai Sefatai Tiftach, u'lesof Hu Amar Yiratzon Imrefi." So Rabbi Yochanan, they have a quote from Rabbi Yochanan who says, "Oh, before you say the Amidah each time, begin it with Adonai Sefatai Tiftach u'Fiyagid Tilatecha, and end it with Yiratzon Imrefi." So to their problem is that first line, Sefatai Tiftach, is another interruption between the blessing of redemption and the beginning of the Amidah, because here's a line that's between the two of them. Adonai Sefatai Tiftach. So they're like, it's not just at night you have Hashkivenu. We have this other interruption in between. And it's in a quote from Rabbi Yochanan where he says you should say this before every Amidah, and you should end every Amidah with Yiratzon Imrefi. This is one of the things Rabbi Sisi sort of like highlights these things. She has a habit of highlighting them, right? The Adonai Sefatai Tiftach isn't just a line in the Siddur. Like here we have Rabbi Yochanan saying like this quote from Psalms that's copied and pasted from the Psalms. You should say it before each time, and you should end it. And she also highlights this often. Like there's so like these are two things that you're supposed to do like the beginning and end of every Amidah, and that's another like when you say, well, the Silverman sort of in the 40s, 50s, like seems the same as today. Well, not only is it the same as do we have today the same as the Silverman, we have the same as Rabbi Yochanan 1900 years ago. So this is when we're somewhat slow to change the Siddur. We're somewhat slow to change. It's the same, which is really beautiful. So I love this because this is like showing us the stratum of how this stuff starts. He really has two great lines from the Psalms, and he's like copy and pasting these lines from the Psalms should like bookend our prayers. Adonai, opened my lips that my mouth may declare your praise, which is a great line to begin a prayer with, right? Please let me pray. And then afterwards, it's this line of really humility, right? Also from the Psalms, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Many of us probably haven't memorized. Next little piece. Eila, Chatam, Kevan, Diktinu Ravanan Lememar, Adonai Savtai Tiftach, Kitfila Erichta Damya. Hachiname Kevan, Diktinu Ravanan Lememar, Hashgivenu, Kigula Erichta Damya. Says it's the same thing. There too. Once the sages said you have to say before the Amidah, Adonai Savtai Tiftach. It's just like a long version. It's become part of the Amidah. It seems like it's an interruption, but before, but once the sages say you should say this, it is absorbed into the Amidah and it becomes part of it. So it's not an interruption. So too in the other case, look, when you say Hashkivenu, give us a peaceful night, that's a long blessing of redemption. When you're asking for redemption, you're asking for God to save you and to get through a night safely. It's the same thing. It's all, so they're just saying that one is sort of absorbed into the next. Now we get more fun stuff. Next paragraph. Almost like, oh yeah, the link here is because in the previous week we had a reference that linking Ga'al Yisrael to the Amidah is what gets you into the world to come. You're a Ben Olam Haba. Here we have this line. Amar Rabbi Yezer, Amar Rabbi Avina. He says, Kol Omer Tehillat LaDavid b'chol yom shalosh pamim uftach lo shehu Ben Olam Haba. Anyone who says Psalm 145, Ashrei, what we will call, 3 times a day, is assured of a place in the world to come. Now, answer to the all-time great question, why do we say Ashrei so gosh darn much? Answer, this line and only this line. Linked, because earlier somebody said, if you say this, you're a Ben Olam Haba, you're getting to the world to come. Now we have all who say Tehillat LaDavid, Psalm 145, what we call Ashrei, 3 times a day, Uftach lo shehu olam haba, right? So we say it in Pesukei de Zimra, we say it at the after the Torah service on weekdays, and then at the beginning of Mincha. On Shabbat, it's Pesukei de Zimra during the Torah service and before Mincha, like at the beginning of Mincha. So it's built into the Siddur 3 times a day to prompt you to get into your so that you can have your place in the world to come. Now we'll talk about why, but like that's the key thing. There is one most Talmud manuscripts read like this. There is one manuscript that was discovered that doesn't have the word 3 there, but most do. My mind can never help wondering, wow, like what if the variant version is the right one? My timer, why is it? Well, there are lots of psalms out there, lots of great 150 psalms. They're great. Like, why is this the one that like is so essential? What makes Ashrei so special? We got to say it so much. My timer, what's up with it? Ilema, maybe you would say, though, really it won't be a good enough reason. Ilema mishum the itaya, the aleph bet. Well, maybe you say that it has a whole alphabet in there, right? Like, so because Ashrei has each letter of the alphabet in it. That it sort of covers everything, right? It's A to Z, Aleph to Tav, Alpha to Omega. Like it's got everything in it, and it represents everything because it's got every letter in it. Maybe that's the reason why it's so great. Name Ashrei Tamei Derech. The Ita be Tamia Afin says, well, then Psalm 119, which begins, happy are they who are upright in the way, says the alphabet 8 times, right? Remember Psalm 119, the longest of all the Psalms, says it 8 times, right? 8 Aleph verses, 8 Bet verses. If saying the alphabet is good in Ashrei, then you know it's even better saying it 8 times. Why not? So why not that? So it can't just be that it's the alphabet because it's because there are others that do that as well. Ela, so maybe mishum deitbe potechet yedecha. Maybe because it has the line potechet yedecha mespelcha, or something like that. You open your hand and satisfy the needs of every living thing. So they're like, maybe that's the line that is so important that we need to say it all the time. Nema, Halal Gadol. Well, if that's the case, then also in the Halal Gadol, which is Psalm 136, that's Kila Lam Chasto, you know it from also on Shabbat Pesach and Zimra, also on Seder night. That also has a similar line where it says that God gives food or bread to all flesh, to all that lives, right? So if they just, for two ideas got shut down. Why is Ashrei so important? First, maybe because it's an alphabetic acrostic. No, there are better alphabetic acrostics out there. 2, maybe it's because it has this line of God's, sort of completeness. God gives food to all creatures. No, well, that's also in a different psalm. That's in Psalm 136, so no big deal. Ele meshum de'it be'tarte. Well, you know why Ashrei is so important? Because it's got both. It's both an acrostic and has the line about God's satisfying all creatures, providing enough for everyone. Those 2 lines together is what makes it so great. So not
Rabbi?
one, not the other, but both.
Rabbi?
Yep.
All of the Psalms,
Only Jack.
not just 145, only Jack tonight. All of the Psalms were written by a person, King David and or others. And yet they have risen to a height of significance that just seems amazing. They're not giving guidance. You don't know who wrote them. It's not like the Talmud, and you have these renowned rabbis who sat and debated. You don't know who wrote these. They're nice words. You can go to a shelf and pick out a nice book of poetry that's nice words. But these in particular, the Psalms in particular, and this one here, one for Ashrei 145, has got, it's considered, it's great enough that the rabbis are discussing it, debating it, whatever. So how did the Psalms rise to this level?
So, good question. Obviously, we don't have a blow by blow, but all of the Tanakh is regarded as divine in like some way, shape, or form. Meaning the certainly for the rabbis, but like for the main of the Jewish tradition through the millennia, it's all from God. Like the David's hand might be the medium, but like that's not that's not it. Like the Bible isn't the Bible until, I think the Bible isn't the Bible until people start regarding it as from God, perfect, cryptic, eternally relevant. Like those 4 things that every so often I throw out that James Kugel will say, like the 4 key assumptions that you need to know about how the Jewish and to a certain extent the Christian tradition reads these things. So it's just that like the Torah has pride of place as like the clearest and best revelation, but like it's all seen as being from God. They have no doubt that this is all that is all from God. They wouldn't say a nice poem written by a nice Jewish boy.
The books of Kings 1 and 2, you know, there's a lot of dry stuff going on in there, and elsewhere, other books that don't seem to be, that, you know, haven't risen. You don't get a whole lot of quotes out of Kings.
Right. Because they don't seem all that from, right? Yeah, I'm telling you, all of it, and it's the, and what's more is, you know, because this is largely the same set of years as like at all the other classes that we, you know, do, like the when the Reform and later the conservative movement sort of start down their path, they do so by saying, you know what, the oral law that we read in the Talmud, not given to Moses at Mount Sinai. We are hereby, you know, doubting that claim, that the of the absolute divine nature of the Mishnah. The Bible, that's from God. Even like look, like right up to the right up like till you get to the close of the 19th century, like the and into the early 20th, like the conservative movement would still be on board with critical scholarship of rabbinic writings, but early on they weren't comfortable doing it with Torah. And really the same idea like applied to the Psalms and everything else. So yeah.
Question goes back, which I asked, I think several pages before, lots before, that was Davis pious? You know, there could be different there could be pages of argument in here in the Gemara. Was David pious?
Correct. Answer is yes. Don't make me talk about him being elbow deep in afterbirth. The David we read about in Kings, the David we read about in Talmud is a little different. Yeah, so no, like each word again from God in some sense. And we'll see this. So I want to keep going because this is these are sort of like questions that people actually ask. Because the next one, about Rabbi Yochanan. Ma lo namar nun ba'ashrei. Hey, why is there a nun in ashrei? By the way, notice that here, if you look at the ashrei in the Siddur, you know it's not just the psalm, right? Sort of uniquely, ashrei starts out with lines from different psalms, right? It is the It has, well, they don't label the verses here, right? The first line, Ashrei Yisrael V'Techa, is from Psalm 84, and then Ashrei Am Shechacha Lo is the end of Psalm 144, and then Tehillat David begins Psalm 145. So there are two lines attached to the beginning, and clearly there was a tradition of attaching those two lines at the beginning way back when, because Rabbi Yochanan is calling it Ashrei, and it doesn't start Ashrei. So that he says, why is there no Nun verse in Ashrei? Right? Famously, there's a good Hebrew school question, right? Like it goes Aleph to Tav, but there's no Nun. Right? It goes right from Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim to Sumecha Neilchol Noflim. Right? It goes from Mem to Samech without a Nun. So why is that, he says? Mipnei sheyesh ba mipaltan shel sonei Yisrael dichtiv nafla lo tosif kum betula Yisrael. He says because it contains an allusion to the downfall of the enemies of Israel, sonei Yisrael. When the Talmud says sonei Yisrael, the enemies of Israel, it means the people of Israel. But because they're going to say something bad here, a prophecy of the bad things that are going to happen to the people of Israel, they can't bring themselves to say it. They can't say, because it says something bad about Israel. Because even saying the phrase bad about Israel is you're like calling on the evil eye. Like you're not, like, don't say anything bad. So they change the bad thing, it says bad things about Israel, to something good. It says bad things about the haters of Israel. Does that make sense? So they say, sometimes they say the exact opposite of what they mean. And you just have to know that that's what they're doing, and it's not uncommon. So when it says enemies of Israel, it means Israel, but they just can't say it, bring themselves to say it. Make sense? Anyway, the quote they're saying is in the book of Amos. It says, "Nafal la tosif kum betula Israel." She will fall and not get up. She will fall and be no more, and rise no more. Virgin Israel, meaning like the people Israel personified as a young maiden will fall and never get up because of her sins. And that line begins with the letter Nun. And it's a terrible line because it says that Israel will fall and never get up. So because Nun is associated with this terrible line, we leave it out of Ashrei because it's too terrible, because Nun just is a trigger letter that like sends people into fits of depression and reminds them of this terrible stuff. We don't say it. So that's their line. Now, you could, obviously scholars wouldn't say that it's because of this line, and almost like, they would say that there's a that's a scribal error, that whoever is writing like a master copy at some point in time, I skipped from Mem to Samech and forgot the Nun verse, just because every so often we make mistakes when copying things. So like that's another possibility, not a possibility to the Talmud, but you could say it out there. Or like I think it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls has a Nun verse. If you look in the Dead Sea, you can Google it. The Dead Sea Scrolls has a Nun verse of Ashrei.
Rabbi, there are other prayers where Nun is deleted or omitted for this reason?
No, famously no, because like it's almost like and there are a number of other acrostic psalms. Like they listed the one, but there are others.
Rabbi,
So it's not a great explanation even for that. But just every so often they do come up with answers, like the one on top, where it's like a long blessing. Like so the answers aren't always great. Yes.
Rabbi, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nun verse is the one that Amos refers to?
No, it's like No, it's its own thing. It's not it's, it's nothing I remember off the top of my head. But um but it's there, which you could read either way, right? You could say originally it wasn't there and that offended somebody's sensibilities, so they stuck it in. Or it's or it was there all along and somebody accidentally left it out. There's no way of knowing which is the real version. Like if there's a real version, there's no way of knowing which one is. But yeah, I forget. I have it in my office, but I can't remember. It's like nothing that would. It's not likely to change your life. Meaning, like it's not some sort of like bolt from the blue. It's like now it all makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, that. But also there's lashon naki. It's clean language. Like they won't say. If they're talking about something bad happening to the people of Israel, they'll say it happens to the enemies of Israel. And you just have to like sort of from context know that what it is they mean. They just can't bring themselves to say it. So that's a long Jewish tradition, not being able to talk about bad things. But Marava, Matzre leachi, nafla v'lo tosiv nofel od kum betula Israel. It's sort of useful, the English I have here, in order to ease the harsh meaning of the words in the West, meaning Eretz Israel, meaning the editor of the Talmud is in Babylonia, so he just refers to the West, and when he thinks of the West, he's talking about the land of Israel. He'll often, so the editor will often say out West, and what he means is Israel, which is nice for us because we're Eurocentric. And like the author of Hatikva, think of Israel as in the East, but for them it's in the West. So in the West, they would say, I think they interpret it with a little difference. They'd say, she has fallen, but she shall fall no more, Virgin of Israel. Nafla, v'lo tosif, nafla Israel. So instead of, they move the punctuation around. So Amos means she will fall and not and no more will she get up. They say she'll fall no more and she will get up. So that's classic playing with the fact that Hebrew has no punctuation. They take the negative verse and read it positively. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak afilu achi chazar David v'somech baruch hakadosh shenetmar somech hanai lechol neflim. Says again, this is good. This is actually to only Jack's point. The Rabbi Nachman Yitzchak says, even here, David went back and connected things with the Ruach HaKadosh, with the divine spirit. Because what's the next line? Somech hanai lechol neflim. God will support all who fall. The Nun verse, which is about Israel falling, which isn't there, the absent Nun verse about Israel falling is followed by God will support all who fall. So that's David using the Ruach HaKadosh, the divine inspiration. So that actually sort of speaks to Jack's, what I think Jack's point might have been, the that David isn't just writing a poem and he's not inspired. He's sort of like God is working through him in this way. The Ruach HaKadosh, the Holy Spirit, if you could say that and have it sound Jewish. So this. Before we leave the page, I have a few like nice pieces in the margin here. In their notes, they have on the significance of Ashrei. Many have questioned the significance of reciting this specific psalm. Some explain that one who recites Ashrei 3 times a day is likely to pray and be meticulous in the fulfillment of all of their mitzvot. According to this interpretation, the recitation of this particular psalm has no particular significance. It's an indication of something much more significant. Others view this chapter as an expression of basic faith because of the acrostic nature of the psalm, A through B, like the or A through Z, Al through Tav, etc. Then it notes at the bottom, like the enemies of Israel thing that I said before, that they have to use euphemism.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
it appears that Ashrei, when you read the translation of it, is almost like the whole prayer book in a nutshell. It's sort of like an executive summary.
It is. I mean, there are better and worse psalms, and it's hard to read anymore because it's so because it's familiar like nothing else is familiar. But yes, it gets there for a reason. A good observation. Good point.
Yeah, but Rabbi, I find that the Psalms of Sukkah de Zimra, they're easy to understand and comprehend. But you say every day, if the serve, the psalm for the day that the Kohanim, the Levim said in the temple, they're very hard to understand. I'm sure there's a lot of interpretations to each one.
Yes. No, it's good news. Yeah, the Psukim. I mean, some of them are familiar. Some of them have a lot of interpretation that could be in. Some are just like super familiar, I think. The next section, I'm gonna do it, but I can do it really fast. Actually, I'm gonna do it tonight, so I can do it fast, and primarily in English, so that we do it. This next section, it's just a short digression. It's at the top of page 24. It begins in the English. If you're looking in the online, it says after this discussion. It's really, the previous statement was a quote from Rabbi Eliezer Bar Avina, and so they're just bringing another one. They're bringing another quote in his name, and so it's going to be a little digression. But I can do it quickly because it's a little bit of angelology, which is worth doing because it's strange, but it's strange enough that we'll rush. He says, "Gadol ma shenamar Michal yoter mima shenamar b'Gavriel." What is said about the angel Michael, is greater than what's said about the angel Gabriel. We don't talk about angels by name a whole lot, but they are here. And not only are they saying them, but they're ranking them. Angel Michael's better things than the angel Gabriel. The Vilu, the Michael Ketiv, and the Elu, that because about Michael, there's a line that's written, Af alai, and one of the seraphim flew to me, he says. The seraph is a type of angel, right? The Elu, Gavei Gabriel Ketiv, and about Gabriel it says, Ish Gabriel, Asher Reiti Bechazon, B'Tchila, Mu'af, Bi'af, Daniel talking about the angel Gabriel appearing to him as a man. Gabriel, whom I'd seen at the beginning in a vision, was caused to fly swiftly, and the fly swiftly is mu'af ba'if, meaning the word fly is in different forms there twice. So for the first one, it's once, and the second one is twice. And so that means that Michael can fly places in one single bound, whereas Gabriel has to take a connecting flight. He needs to fly twice. He has to stop once on his flight, and that's why his flight is mentioned twice. I'm going to go through this very quickly. You don't need to understand it. Just get that that's what they're saying. Like, Michael's more important. He's got a direct flight. When it says he flies there. When Gabriel flies somewhere, it says he flies, and they're like, oh, well, that means that there's a or he flies, yes, flies. And that means that he has to take a stop along the way. And as we all know, for those of us old enough to remember air travel before March of 2020, those are like, if you got a connection, you know you're not the top of the heap. Right? This is basic. Even they knew it in the Talmud. If you got a connection, you're not the top of the heap. So Michael, 1 flight, Gabriel, 2 flights. Michael's greater. He doesn't have to take the connection. My mashma achar Michael who? How do I know the first one's Michael? Like the second one says it's Gabriel, but the first one, how do I know it's Michael? Rabbi Yochanan says, well, we know it because in the line that we quoted, it says, "And one of the seraphim flew to me," and elsewhere it's written, "Hine Michael achad mina sarim arishanim." It says, and Daniel says, "Behold, Michael, one of the chief ministers of the king, came to my aid." It says that the words from Daniel refers to Michael as one, meaning the one. It must be the one of the seraphs, the angels talked about there. So they have a tradition linking the word one in this instance with a one in that instance. That is called a Gezara Shava, which is when a word that appears in 2 different places in the Tanakh are linked together. And that can only exist if somebody has a tradition from Mount Sinai that was the case. Meaning I can't make one up, but they're able to cite one from somebody else. But in any event, they think the first one refers to Michael and the second one to Daniel. And now we'll get the rundown. Tana. So it was taught in a Tanaic source in the Tosefta. Michael Bechad. Michael has nonstop flights, 1 flight. Gabriel B'shtayim. Gabriel has to take 1 connection. He has 2 flights. Eliyahu Ba'arba. Elijah the prophet, who sort of gets elevated to quasi-angel status. Al Ba'arba. He has to take 4 flights. In other words, he has 3 connections. Malach HaMavet B'shmone. And the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, has to take 8 to get anywhere. B'sha'a D'magefa Be'echad. During a time of plague, the angel of death, 1 flight, a direct one. This is our little bit of angelology. So it seems, as I say, there's a note here, and with this we can wrap up. In the margin, Midrash concerning the angel's flight contains an assessment of the virtues and the hierarchies as well as the attributes of what they represent. The angel Michael is designated as the angel of Israel. Gabriel is the angel through which the prophets prophesy. Although he acts as a defender of the Jewish people, he's essentially the angel of judgment and minister of fire. Michael is a minister of loving kindness and compassion. For this reason, Michael is capable of traveling anywhere in a single flight, while Gabriel must take 2 flights to reach his destination. Then they have the source of Tosefta for the hierarchy of the hosts. Michael and Gabriel are first because of their direct relationship between them and their missions. And after them is Elijah, who's also considered by the sages as one who represents Israel as the angel of the covenant. Since Elijah is a human being who is elevated to the status of an angel, this is wild stuff. He is ranked below Gabriel. After Elijah is the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, or Satan, the evil inclination, who is a manifestation of evil in the world. He travels in 8 flights, allowing a person time to repent before the angel of death carries out his mission. However, during a plague, the angel of death arrives at his destination in a single bound and does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. Whew. This is the part of that we never get to talk about because it's so wild. But
Rabbi,
yeah.
I think isn't angels referred to like as a messenger in the Torah, and if so,
Yeah.
how is that different than a prophet?
Well, the angel is not human, for one.
So you could have human angels, or a messenger.
Yeah, you could have a messenger who is a human, though the angel, I mean, here they're talking about winged creatures, right? Winged divine beings, zipping around. So when people see the angels, they see them as people, meaning they appear to humanize as humans most of the time. But the prophet is an actual human.
Rabbi, is an angel the same as a spirit? We've been studying Lilith as a spirit.
No.
Thank you.
They'll get to Lilith. I don't think I don't remember her appearing in Brachot. But like that's a different thing, and that's part of like that. I mean, notice that there are like sort of, I mean, things that we never talk about. There are different gradations of angel and different gradations of divine being. And here, like even among the angels, there's they have a, you know, coach's poll of like who's first and who's second.
It was just talking about spirits were coming to Adam in that part of the story of Lilith.
It's been a while since I've looked at Lilith. If you're looking at that with Rabbi CC, it might be fresher in her mind than in mine. Yeah. But this, I mean, again, we part of the tradition of non-Orthodox Judaism is to have a rationalist bent, and this doesn't necessarily fall into that category, which is part of why it's fascinating, because we never talk about angels and then ranking that, like sort of like not only are there angels, but like they've got some details on them, which is fascinating.